And let us finish this, the 10th chapter of the 3rd book of A Tale of Two Cities. The name of the chapter is The Substance of the Shadow. The name of the book is The Track of a Storm. We are listening to what Dr. Manette wrote when he was in his cell being read by Dr. Manette. These scraps of paper fail me. One was taken from me with a warning yesterday. I must finish my record today. She was a good, compassionate lady and not happy in her marriage. How could she be? The brother distrusted and disliked her, and his influence was all opposed to her. She stood in dread of him, and in dread of her husband too. When I handed her down to the door, she was a child. Oh, there was a child, a pretty boy, from 2 to 3 years old, in her carriage. For his sake, doctor, she said, pointing to him in tears, I will do all I can to make what poor amends I can. He will never prosper in his inheritance otherwise. I have a presentiment that if no other innocent atonement is made for this, it will one day be required of him. What I have left to call my own is little beyond the worth of a few jewels. I will make it the first change. I will make it the first charge of his life to bestow, with the compassion and lamenting of his dead mother, on this injured family, if the sister can be discovered. She kissed the boy and said, caressing him, It is for thine own dear sake. Thou wilt be faithful, little Charles. The child answered her bravely, Yes. I kissed her hand, and she took him in her arms and went away, caressing him. I never saw her more. As she had mentioned her husband's name in faith that I knew it, I added no mention of it to my letter. I sealed my letter, and not trusting it out of my own hands, delivered it myself that day. That night, the last night of the year, toward 9 o'clock, a man in a black dress rang at my gate, demanded to see me, and softly followed my servant, Ernest Defarge, a youth, upstairs. When my servant came into the room where I sat with my wife, oh, my wife, beloved of my heart, my fair young English wife, we saw the man, who was supposed to be at the gate, standing silent behind him. An urgent case in the Rue Saint-Honoré, he said. It would not detain me. He had a coach waiting. It brought me here. It brought me to my grave. When I was clear of the house, a black muffler was drawn tightly over my mouth from behind, and my arms were pinioned. The two brothers crossed the road from a dark corner, and identified me with a single gesture. The Marquis took from his pocket the letter I had written, showed it to me, burnt it in the light of a lantern that was held, and extinguished the ashes with his foot. Not a word was spoken. I was brought here. I was brought to my living grave. And if it had pleased God to put it in the hard heart of either of the brothers, in all these frightful years, to grant me any tidings of my dearest wife, so much as to let me know by a word whether alive or dead, I might have thought that he had not quite abandoned them. But now I believe that the mark of the Red Cross is fatal to them, and that they have no part in his mercies. And them, and their descendants, to the last of their race, I, Alexander Manette, unhappy prisoner, to this last night of the year, 1767, in my unbearable agony, denounce to the times when all these things shall be answered for. I denounce them to heaven and to earth. A terrible sound arose when the reading of this document was done, a sound of craving and eagerness that had nothing articulate in it but blood. The narrative called up the most revengeful passions of the time, and there was not a head in the nation but must have dropped before it. Little need in presence of that tribunal and that auditory to show how the Defarges had not made the paper public, and the other captured Bastille memorials bore in procession, and had kept it, biding their time. Little need to show that this detested family name had long been anathematized by Saint Antoine, and was wrought into the fatal register. The man never trod ground whose virtues and services would have sustained him in that place that day against such denunciation. And all the worse for the doomed man that the denouncer was a well-known citizen. his own attached friend, the father of his wife. One of the frenzied aspirations of the populace was for imitations of the questionable public virtues of antiquity, and for sacrifices and self-immolations of the people's altar, on the people's altar. Therefore, when the president said, else had his own head quivered on his shoulders, that the good physician of the Republic would deserve better still of the Republic by rooting out an obnoxious family of aristocrats, and would doubtless feel a sacred glow and joy in making his daughter a widow and her child an orphan, there was an excitement, patriotic fervor, not a touch of human sympathy. "Much influence around him has the doctor," murmured Madame Defarge, smiling to the Vengeance. "Save him now, doctor, save him!" At every juryman's vote there was a roar, another and another, roar and roar, unanimously voted, at heart and by descent, an aristocrat, an enemy of the Republic, a notorious oppressor of the people, back to the conciergerie, and death within 24 hours. And that is the end of Chapter 10.